Oh my God, welcome back to I Swear to Drunk. I am not God. I am your host, Brittany Perkins, or Britt Perkins is preferred. So I really thank you for, if you're hearing my voice, then that means that you made it to this week and you should be grateful. And also you've made it to the podcast, and I'm just hoping that maybe just because we're friends, I'm hoping that you actually did listen to the first episode, because you kind of need to in order to enjoy this one. The last episode, which was episode 5, part 1, was the Fox Hollow Farm murders, which was the terrible crimes of Herb Baumeister. We went into him. We got pretty deep into him. Oh God, why does that sound? It's just not right. We got really deep into him for an hour and a half, but you see whatever. We got into him for an hour and a half. That was a very, very uncomfortable hour and a half. But you're here now and we're enjoying each other. So what am I drinking? I am drinking a Cosmopolitan. Very simple, very easy, incredibly easy. That will be, I use Cointreau. You can use triple sec if you would like to use just a regular cheapy version of triple sec. That's fine too. You just need that little pop. And then cranberry juice, lemon juice, and your preferred vodka. Any vodka obviously will do. I prefer Tito's. I will always prefer Tito's. So yeah, you put that in a shaker, shake it up for about 15 seconds, 20, maybe with 30 if you want it to be really, really cold, and opens up those flavors, and you pour it. You strain it into a martini glass, and that is your Cosmopolitan. I'm drinking that, and I have a shaker here just sitting, sweating, waiting for me to need to drink more of it. I actually bought one of those really cool shakers that provides like the different cocktails, so you can, like, while you're drunk and entertaining, you can just swivel it and it'll give you the ingredients that you need to make anything you want: a Malibu, a martini, an apple martini, a gimlet, a margarita, a Mai Tai, a Cosmopolitan. So I cheated, but it's fantastic, and it suits how I'm feeling today, which I'm feeling fine. Okay, my last episode, I was a little sick. I hope I'm on the ass end of whatever the fuck I picked up. I'm hoping it wasn't RSV or anything weird. What I do know, it wasn't COVID. That's the only thing at this point that matters. I'm also actively, diligently working on my sinuses with an allergist and with my ENT. So taking a lot of meds, doing a lot of nasal rinsing. So if I sound congested, which I usually do, that's because not just because of my condition, but also because I'm in the process of fixing it. So this is what healing looks like. So now I want to kind of give you a little bit of an update on, not even an update, but a recap. And I will have an update shortly, but I want to give you a recap of Herb Baumeister. I'm not going to go super deep into him. You already know, Weird Herb, which I learned as I was researching the second part, was what he was also called. And, I'm kind of okay with just calling him Weird Herb going forward. He was killing, allegedly, he was killing men, particularly gay men, in Indiana, and possibly Ohio, between 1980 and 1995-ish, right? He was kind of accused of being the I-70 strangler as well. That person is still considered as identified, but he is the prime suspect there. Herb Baumeister he would travel to gay bars in Indianapolis. He would bring men back to his estate known as the Fox Hollow Farm, and he would kill them and through erotic asphyxiation, and then, have a little sex, and then he'd dispose of their bodies. So, where we left off on the first episode too, his son finds bones in the back of their house, which was like this wooded area. And that's kind of where his tale starts to kind of spiral because, he was getting kind of arrogant and sloppy. So, he got caught by his own son. And then from there, whatever. Hey, go listen to fucking part 1. Like, don't make me do this. Now, I'm hoping that you made you a Cosmopolitan. If you didn't, that's fine. But drink whatever the fuck you drinking. If that's water, if that's coffee, if that's tea, do your thing. All right. So now, fast forward. Herb Baumeister killed himself on July 3rd, 1996. Now, I didn't really think about what I was getting into by investigating the paranormal stuff. I want to preface this real quick because I usually give myself about 10 minutes to do that. I got about 3 more minutes. I enjoy paranormal stories. I do not like to watch paranormal investigative shows. I think they're corny. They're not entertaining to me. But when it comes to stories, I really do find them very fascinating. And I will give you 2 shows in particular that I think one is Canadian. I went on a binge. This had to be like, I want to say 5 Christmases ago. Yeah, because that's the type of shit I watch on Christmas. And the only reason why I remember that is because I was staying at Sal's place. And I was like, searching through Netflix. It was cold. I think it had snowed. I was by myself. And so, me and my dog were just like chilling in the bed. And then I was like, I want to watch some paranormal shit. And so I watched this show called Paranormal Survivor. And that show is probably, to me, one of the best paranormal shows ever. Like the stories are fascinating. The way that the survivors tell their story is almost like they are being attacked by a physical, like if you've ever watched I Survived or anything like that. I like shows like that where you tell the story. I don't want to do the whole EVP thing, I'm not into that, like, at all. So I picked up this book regarding the Fox Hollow Farms, and I linked it in the show notes to help me along. And, and there were some very interesting things that came out of it as well. Okay. Like, we'll learn some details that I didn't really, pick up on when I did the first part. And then, now doing the second part, I kind of know some things. I kind of got some new opinions about some things. So I kind of just wanted to preface that. I'm not being into paranormal investigative shows, but I enjoy the stories. There is an investigative component to this particular story because this book was written by the investigator. I don't engage in it that much with the episode I'm about to present to you now, because again, I don't care. I mean, if we're just being 100% honest, I don't find it, it's useless information to me. Oh God, I'm sorry. I inhaled my Cosmopolitan. Now sip. Well, I get some of that out of my throat. Now, Herb Baumeister killed himself on July 3rd, 1996. When his body was discovered, the first person said that there was no gun at the scene. That was the first person that arrived. Then there was this story where the cops were able to bring his gun back over the border. So obviously there was a gun, even though they were not allowed to take their own service weapons. Now, in my opinion, I don't know. I don't know Border Patrol. I wonder if they allowed them to bring the gun back because it's an American registered gun in Canada versus them bringing their service weapons into their country. I think that's probably why that kind of happened that way. Belch. So then there was another rumor that he was found lying in the middle of an occult symbol surrounded by dead birds. I don't know how much that is true. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not digging in the blogs. Like, what's the point? You know what I mean? We weren't there. Why would you dig in the blogs to even find out? But that's an interesting little tidbit to mention. So I did. There's no definitive answer though, to his condition when he was discovered, which to me is I would say it's probably strange, but I think it depends on how many people discovered him. And I think it depends on how many people were just traipsing around the crime scene. I mean, there is this weird, he didn't have a gun. He was a part of another, like this occult group. Look, not gonna knock it. All things are possible. Okay. All things are possible. This man was pretty evil. I don't know what he engaged in, but he was sloppy on a lot of other fronts. I kind of feel like there'd be more evidence of this in other ways if this were true. I mean, there is the, whole videotape thing, which if you listen to part 1, you'd know he recorded his crimes as well. And when he committed suicide, right before he committed suicide, he was caught under a bridge taking a nap by a police officer, and they let him go. But one thing that she did mention was that in the back seat, he had a box full of tapes. He passed a lot of waterways and canals and rivers as he was heading toward Canada or deeper into Canada. The likelihood of the VHS tapes being recovered at this point is pretty unlikely. I mean, unless he put them in a bag and the bag is watertight, I highly doubt we'll ever find those. Now, back to the property. So when he killed these people, all of these men, these poor men, and honestly, it was never really proven whether or not Herb killed them at all. The reality of it is that you got a possible suspect who has now committed suicide. You really ain't got a lot to work with, okay? What you do have, though, is witnesses, and you have a lot of circumstantial evidence that would make it obvious. I mean, it makes it obvious that he was definitely involved in something, and he had his little quirks. So what was interesting, too, is that when they went to the property, it was obvious that Herb had just placed the bodies in the woods, and he was just simply like allowing them to decompose. And that means that they weren't buried. So once they were decomposed, he would set them on fire. They did find like burn piles where, like a 10-foot burn pile, actually, where he would start to kind of break down some of those bones. And on the west side of the property, they found several bones at the bottom of the creek, which was behind the home. So the animals, would eventually get to the bodies and then start to pull the bodies apart piece by piece and carry them off, consume them, put them in water, whatever, whether they were, land creatures and they ended up in water, whatever, but they knew that animals were taking the pieces and carrying them off. And that is why it has been so hard to kind of just find like whole bodies. They're finding pieces of bodies, just bones. So as of November 28th of this year, investigators were able to match a bone found in a tank on the Baumeister property, and they found the DNA matches a victim by the name of John Turner. So police, they will likely never know what happened to him, though. Just because you find a bone, you're able to match the victim doesn't mean you know the story. But the Hamilton County Coroner's Office said they're redoubling their efforts to identify the remains. So with the help of new DNA technology, they should be able to match some of the profiles with genealogical databases. So thank you, genealogical databases, because that's been actually pretty helpful in a lot of cold cases. They're also asking if anyone knows or knew any male or had any male relatives missing during the like late 1800s. The fuck? In the late 1980s through 1990s. I'm sorry, not late, just even late, because he was killing men possibly through the 80s. They want you to come in to provide a DNA sample. So they have 10,000 bones. They need samples to match them with. And the contact is the Hamilton County Coroner's Office at 317-770-4415. As of 3 days ago, on December 4th, the Indiana Canine Search and Recovery brought out around 10 dogs to help search the property for more human remains. 8 men have been found total, but they know there are at least 12 more they're trying to match. And how do they know? Because they're finding the bones that a person would only have one of. So I know, they would find, that bone that's right under your thumb. If they find 12 right ones or 12 left ones, then they know, that there had to be 12 different individuals, because obviously people only have one of those. So because DNA is now faster and cheaper to process, this should be easier. And they hope to find more victims so they can lay them to rest, and so their families can have some peace. So I want to drink real quick for all of those victims, because this is just messed up. Now, after Herb's death, the Baumeisters ended up moving back into another house owned by Julie, and Fox Hollow ended up back in the hands of the original owner, who had a 5-year contract with the Baumeisters. As of November 2022, the new owners, Robert Graves and his wife Vicky, they live there with their 2 sons, and he and his family have experienced hauntings. They've experienced hauntings constantly. So they decided to have paranormal investigators come in their home. They sometimes host tours, which I get. They like, look, man, this place is a satellite. We should probably not even just capitalize on it, but anybody here who has the experience, who can, help these people move along, help the spirit move along, help kind of close some of these portals, they should come. So he kind of opened up his home. He also opened up his home to paranormal investigators. Now, the writer of this book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, his name is Rich Estep. He's also an investigator. He was given free reign and was allowed access to every acre of the estate to report back to the Graves family. Now, so how did they end up there? In 2006, this was, 16 years ago, Graves family and Graves, who's Robert, and his family were looking for a new home. So they're what people would call horse people. They love the idea of Fox Hollow Farm, and they love the community was pleasant. So the county was considered at one time the best place to live in America. They show up at the property to meet the realtor, and they found that Fox Hollow Farm was surrounded by a large horse farm. The house was fantastic, but it wasn't well maintained, and it stunk. I mean, there was a raccoon problem. Some of the drywall was collapsing, but overall, the house was pretty sturdy. So the original owners had put a lot of money into the building of the property. The house itself was worth $1 million in 1977. Graves had asked why the house was not occupied, and the realtor was honest and told him what had happened there. The asking price at the time was $2.8 million, which was the going rate for the area. So they were like, bet. But they left the property to decide whether or not this was something they could afford, and whether or not it was a house that was worth it, considering the history was pretty goddamn morbid. So the family decided, you know what? It's worth it. They made a counteroffer. The owners didn't like the counteroffer. Then after 2 years, the owner contacted them directly, and they were the only people that offered anything. So by 2009, they moved. They moved to Fox Hollow Farm. Now, I know, look, sip. Ain't no way in hell. Unless that counteroffer, Actually, I don't know what counter offer I would have accepted. Here is if it was the Brittany's family, the Perkins family, this is how it would have happened. Drive up to Fox Hollow Farm. Do. Husband in the back, because that's where he belongs. No, I'm just joking. Kids in the back, husband in the front. Cool, driving. And then we get there, we find out this is the Baumeister house, and then I'm like, how much you asking for? $2.8 million. Bye. That's what's happening. That's the exchange. The house was probably worth $2.8 million. But once I found out who the fuck lived in it and what the fuck he was doing in there, I would have been out. I don't need it. I don't got time. I don't care about horses that much. I don't care about farms that much. I don't care about isolation that much. I don't want it. I don't want the problems. Okay? I don't want the problems. So they move in 3 years after discovering this place. And the first night, they all slept in the same room, which low key, valid. Absolutely valid. Totally. I mean, shit, if it was a new house and it wasn't haunted, I think that most people would probably just locally, you know what I mean? Be like, okay, we just gonna all sleep in the living room. I think that makes more logistical sense. You know what I'm saying? So, but the problem was too, they had electrical issues, they had pest issues, they had plumbing issues. So the thing is, this house ain't even 2.8 million material. Okay. And it's kind of, so I get the family being like, look, we gonna sleep in the same room. Now the lawn was 4 feet tall because it hadn't been maintained. The swimming pool needed to be cleaned. It needed to be refilled. It took 6 hours to cut the fucking grass. No, ma'am. Negative. 6 hours? 6 hours to cut the grass? So they realized very quickly that the big ass house thing had some big ass problems, and this house was going to need a lot of work. But they did love the seclusion. So the nearest neighbor, by the way, was half a mile away. But they did every now and again have to deal with strangers just popping up because, of course, it's Herb Baumeister's house. Everybody else knows about it. And, murder freaks who are like, okay, I'm just going to pop up at Herb Baumeister's house, see what's going on. But the owner did believe that he figured that most people thought that the house was vacant. I also think that most people were probably trying to figure out why anyone would actually live there. Now, eventually, Rob, I'm calling him Rob because clearly he's my friend. Eventually, Rob would have someone move in that upstairs apartment. And in the upstairs apartment, there's a 1,200 square foot apartment that's actually above the garage. And he had a coworker who was kind of like always coming late. Rob worked at a car dealership. And his coworker was always showing up late. And so he was like, yo, I'm sorry. It's just that this traffic is shitty. And so then Rob offered him an opportunity to live in his apartment. He was like, look, it was just, with this guy, it was just him and his dog. And so Rob was like, look, me and Vicky, we got a little apartment upstairs. Just you could have it. It's 1,200 square feet. You can move in with us. That way you can get back and forth to work. It's just you and your dog. And so he moves in Joe LeBlanc. And he was warned about the property, but Joe wasn't really bothered by it. He seemed actually excited about living in a place like that. So almost immediately, Vicky, Rob's wife, she was in the swimming pool room. She was cleaning. The kids had been fucking around in there, and the gravel they had kind of like drug gravel into like the pool area. The pool is in the basement. And she said the vacuum that she was using just turned itself off. It just turned off. She was like, what is happening? She noticed that it was unplugged. Now, it was plugged into an extension cord. The way I kind of read it, it was kind of like one of those like extension cords that like the power supply, with the switch. So she plugged it back in, and then she continued the vacuum. because she thought she had just kind of like yanked it out of the extension cord. But then as she was vacuuming, the plug unplugged again, and she didn't pull it out of the socket. So she was like mad confused. And apparently Vicky's a scientist. And they say scientist. I don't know what type of scientist she was, but she was a scientist. So she tried to come up with a logical answer, but nothing. And she went back to vacuuming. So after plugging it in again, this time the plug just fucking flew out of the outlet. And she actually saw it happen. She said she sensed she wasn't alone. She said it felt like someone was there. She told Rob afterward, quote, "And I got this strong sense that this invisible someone didn't want me to be in there with them," end quote. So that's Vicky. That's the wife. That's her first experience. Joe, his first night in the house, had a dream he was running through the woods. He was terrified. Something was chasing him. He couldn't like see who it was, but his instincts in the dream told him that he was in danger. And because he was half asleep, he leapt out of the bed and ended up running into the door frame and bumping his head. He then started to hear things. He would hear like knocking on the door of his apartment. He would open the door to find that no one was there. He felt a dreadful presence. And then later, while watching TV, he thought he saw something flash by him. And when he went to go investigate, there was nothing. So, Rob, while working on the house one day, he heard his wife arrive from work. He had been painting and shit. And, Vicky pulls up. And then Vicky, they're talking, and, she's like, "Oh shit, you did a good job." And then she notices a figure in the woods on the side of the house. And at first she thought, "Oh fuck, another trespasser." Then she said she saw a young man in a bright red shirt and jeans. His back was to her, so she didn't see his face. But then she said from the thighs down, his legs were missing. Then it just vanished. So Rob heads to the trees to find the man. But then there was like no evidence of the man. And Vicky was like, not okay. She was like, what the absolute fuck is going on? By the way, this is broad daylight. That was Vicky's first sighting. Sip. Now, excuse me. A month into Joe LeBlanc's stay, he's out walking his dog when he heard a sound. Not common in the woods. The sound he'd heard was not what he was used to. I guess he kind of was just like used to like crickets and bugs and, cicadas and shit. I don't know. So his dog just stopped. His dog was walking. Dogs, they know shit. And he started staring off in the distance. Then he started to growl. So the dog just fucking ran off. He's like, "I am out, bro." But he didn't run away. He ran into the tree line towards something. And Joe saw the man in the tree line with the red shirt and no legs. Then the man disappeared. His dog did not come back, but he like, "Yo, like, this my best friend." You don't leave your dog behind. He didn't want to leave his dog. So he headed toward the tree line where the dog ran. And he started to just feel really uncomfortable. And with his flashlight, he saw the fucking man in the red shirt. And the man in the red shirt was just staring at him. The dog came out of nowhere, ran behind, Joe's like, "I'm getting the fuck up out of here." The dog came out of nowhere, was like, "Pop, pop." And he was like, "We out." And they ran. And so Joe and his dog changed their nightly routine. They were like, "Yeah, nah, hard pass. Night walks don't seem to be the mood." So Vicky and Joe were sure that they saw the same ghost walking in the same area and disappearing in the same area. But who was he? So 1 month later, Joe found a 12-inch bone. And Robert contacted a forensic pathologist, the same one that dealt with the cases in the 90s, and found that it was a left femoral shaft and it was human. Ooh, no surprise there. No surprise there. So Joe would also experience the sound of walking in his apartment. He would like continue to see strange figures walking in the woods. He wouldn't see the red shirt man so often, but he would see a black figure that he described as blacker than black. So Joe would later have another experience with the door knocker. The knocks were so powerful that the door rattled, and then he noticed that the door knocker was hanging at a 90-degree angle, and then it just like knocked one more time, and then it fell back to its original position. Now, he knew something was playing with him. I mean, his dog was terrified. He wouldn't come out, like the dog wouldn't come out from under the bed. And then the doorknob started to turn back and forth and then stop. And something was trying to get in the apartment. So the door then flew back open onto its hinges, and a man came up behind Joe while he was staring out of the doorway. The apparition appeared like in a panic, like he had been running for his life, and then it just disappeared. Now, Joe was convinced it was one of Baumeister's victims reliving the experience. Quote, one theory regarding such events is that the replay is some sort of natural recording that takes place in situations of extremely strong emotion. It is almost as if the intense emotional energy can somehow imprint a sort of video recording on the atmosphere, which can be played back and viewed at a future time by those who are capable of perceiving it. In such cases, there is not an intelligent entity at work. The apparitions themselves are no more sentient than the people on our TV screens. So then, one night, end quote. So then one night, the family, they were like, you know what, there's a lot happening. We should probably look into like what's going on a little bit deeper. So they started researching the murders. They started researching Baumeister's dumbass. And while watching one of the old TV news segments on videotape, that's like one of the things that happened was that Joe realized that he saw one of the victims in his apartment. He was 100% sure it was him. The guy that ran and looked like he was in a panic. He saw him on one of the news segments as one of the men. So the family, at this point, they were like, this may be a good time to set up a camera system. I mean, it's a false sense of security, but it kind of made the family feel comfortable. But it was clear that there was something going on the property. One evening, while the kids were playing in the pool, Joe was underwater. Joe LeBlanc was underwater. He was towards the deep end when he came up for a rest. And he could feel cold, large hands closing around his neck from behind. And the other boys were at the end of the pool. So he left the side of the pool and he started heading towards the center because he like, what the fuck? So I guess he just drifted off towards the center of the pool. And that's when he felt two hands lock around his throat. He could feel himself being dragged under the water. The boys were just staring at him thinking that he was joking, but he wasn't. And he got out of the pool and refused to swim in the pool ever again, which I'm like, fuck, absolutely, yeah. Not today, Satan. Joe, and you're probably like, why does shit keep happening to Joe? Joe's special. Joe's a beacon of some sort, because one time Joe was in his apartment when he heard a scraping noise, and he can hear it coming from like the little kitchenette in his apartment. And when he went to go check, he saw that all of his knives were removed from the block and were lined up in the sink. There were even marks cut into the wall, and he didn't even know if they were new or not. He was like, he had never noticed them before, but he was concerned. He was concerned that maybe the guy he saw was actually stabbed in his apartment. So he decided that he was going to do his own EVP. If you don't know what an EVP is, that's an electronic voice phenomenon session. To me, it kind of feels like a bad idea, just saying, and just me. Like, I do understand that, people feel like, maybe we should talk to it. I want to. It's just that simple. I want to talk to it. Look, I listen and watch weird shit. You already know that about me. I don't want to hear though. I don't want to hear though. I don't want none of that energy here though. Like after my relationship ended because my ex-boyfriend was evil, I literally had to have my place cleaned, like energetically cleaned, because that shit is real. I cannot imagine how thick the energy is in that area, in that space. So me just being like, oh, just regular old Britney performing an EVP, nah, hard pass, not gonna happen. But he recorded some shit. And he thought that he was being attacked by Herb Baumeister himself. So, excuse me, if you hear me wheeze, that's because, phlegm, you're grown, you got it. So, quote, Class A EVPs are crystal clear, and it is very easy to make out the words that are being spoken. Having reviewed the EVP, we must point out that it is a Class B recording. In other words, a little too muffled and indistinct to be absolutely unmistakably clear, but of remarkable clarity nonetheless. The voice speaking is undeniably that of a man, and it was not Joe's voice, nor were there any other people present in the room when it was recorded. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt. He recorded something. The sound that he got was the married one. That was the quote. I got nothing else on that. Now, eventually, Ghost Adventures came, which I respect anybody's hustle. Not a fan. Not a fan of Ghost Adventures. They do too much. That's just my opinion. I just don't like it. It's a paranormal show that's hosted by Zach Bagans. If you don't know who Zach Bagans is, he's like Ghost Adventures. That's what he is. He does all that shit. They'll spend a night in a hotel. They'll investigate. They'll, you know what I mean? Like they'll do that type of thing. And, they ended up coming to Fox Hollow Farm. The family spent the night in a hotel. The team investigated. So basically they did TV show shit. I work in TV. So, even when I was reading about it, I was like, sounds like some TV show shit. Now, they did hear a loud noise in the pool room. They picked up a Class A EVP of a man's voice saying the word help. When Zach asked the name, the voice responded, I'm dead. After a few voice recordings, clangs, and a couple of equipment problems, Ghost Adventures left. You see what I'm saying? Like, the fuck? You're probably like, Brittany, you don't know Zach. Zach ain't do shit to you. He didn't, but I don't know. It's just corny. The shows are corny. So anyway, now people believe that Herb's spirit was still there. They definitely figured his victims were. There was a shaman that believed that several of the Native American spirits in the area were still active on the property. 1, because they were pissed, and 2, rightfully so, and 3, because what the fuck are you doing with our land? Native American, we talked about this in Mothman with Sal. Native Americans and their appreciation of their land, they inject it with their energy. So this whole idea of like Native Americans being fucking irritated with what's going on their land is completely likely to me. And I'm not just saying this, but I do have Native American background. Wash Naha is a descendant of mine, and he so I definitely get that as a descendant of mine. Yeah, whatever, I'm drunk. So now enter Richard Estep, who is the paranormal investigator that wrote this wonderful book. I will say this book is good. It is good. I'm not going to take that away from him. He's been a paranormal investigator for 24 years. He decided to fly out to Indiana from Colorado to investigate Fox Hollow Farm. He had 5 people with him. They set up their equipment on a bar downstairs, and they had like spirit boxes, thermometers, laser grids, EMF readers. They had air ionization meters. They had motion sensors. They had static and video cameras. So they came fully like Ghostbuster loaded. The grids were the first thing they set up. The lasers are good for dark rooms. So if shadows or something cross, then the beams will make it visible, like the shadows visible to the camera. So they picked up a figure the first night, but it was nothing spectacular. It was determined that it wasn't anyone in the family, and they were sure that what they saw was not an animal, but the mystery was kind of never solved. So they knew there's something funky going on here, but we don't really know what. Now, the pool room was the first go, and it was like freakishly, eerily quiet. They did see a shadow, but nothing was moving in the room, and the laser just then died. The batteries were refreshed, but then they knew that like unexplained battery drains were possible. It's an indicator that paranormal energy is picking up, and because energy is required to appear, things tend to drain. So they decided to play some 80s, 90s gay bar music. So they played I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor on a loudspeaker to kind of stimulate activity. That made sense to them because they knew that there was a gay bar component, and that maybe it would arouse some of the spirits of the victims or even Herb, but there was no go. So one of them thought they saw someone out of the window. They found no one. They tried to do an EVP session in the pool room. They picked up a male energy in the middle of the pool, like strong negative energy. Likely not a victim though, but could have been maybe Herb Baumeister. One of the investigators by the name of Cletus, he heard a sigh and asked the energy if it was a woman. If a woman present was okay. And the spirit said yes. After questions, they listened to the audio, but none of the responses were recorded. So while they were in the kitchen figuring out what to do, they heard footsteps on the staircase, and the dog stood at the foot of the staircase, but they couldn't figure out how the dog even got out. They were like, wait a minute, like the dog, how? And then when they looked, the door at the top of the stairs was open. So Rich decided to use what was called the human pendulum technique. And I'm going to explain what that is. He said, quote, "The way this works is that one person volunteers to be the titular pendulum. They stand in the middle of a fairly open space, in this case, at the shallow end of a pool, and are watched closely by observers on both sides. In our case, we also video record the sessions for future analysis. Another investigator controls the session and acts as a questioner, encouraging any entities present that wish to communicate to do so by means of the human pendulum. An emphasis is placed on the fact that only spirits of an honest, light nature are permitted to communicate, and that dark entities are prohibited from doing so. This sometimes, but not always, acts as a safety measure for the participants. Once the pendulum is opened up, the questioner asks the spirits to demonstrate the yes position. The person acting as the pendulum is often surprised to find themselves tilting forward, backward, or to one side, completely against their will. I swear I'm not doing that. It's an all too common response for the first time pendulum volunteers. Now, once the yes position has been established, the same needs to be done for the no position, and then you're off to the races, as they say in Kentucky. Roughly 40 to 50% of people I've tried this technique on have been susceptible to it, leaving aside the possibility of an intentional fraud. I completely trust the integrity of those on my team. There are two obvious explanations for what is going on with the human pendulum. Most skeptics come down on the side of it all being micromuscular motion, a series of completely involuntary nervous signals that are causing the volunteer to sway back and forth in response to questions. After all, many of us have a deep subconscious desire to please. This is one explanation for how spirit boards work. Micromuscular tremors in the hands and forearms, moving the planchette around to spell out meaningful words. The skeptics do indeed have a point this is a very real neurologic reflex, and one that the experiencer has no control over. However, I believe that it is also possible to genuine spirit communication for genuine spirit communication to occur via those same means. Just because the spirit board and the human pendulum sometimes fall victim to false positives does not mean that this is always the case. End quote. So Sean, during this experience, feels fingertips touching his hands sexually. Erin felt herself being pushed in the back. Then they finally got the chance to meet Joe. Now, Joe LeBlanc is, like I said, a beacon. He picks up a lot of energy. There's a lot that happens when he's around. And he is honestly the one that felt the most experiences. So they were just excited to finally meet him. Sip. So, quote, Joe believes that Fox Hollow Farms is haunted by 7 discrete and separate entities. He began to check them off on his fingers as he's named them all. You've got Herb Baumeister himself, or something that likes to masquerade as him. Then there's 5 of his victims. And finally, the elemental. Elementals are reputed to be non-human spirits that arise from the land, from woods, streams, and rocks, and many cultures believe in them, some actively so, whereas in others, they have faded into myth and folklore, but the concept is prevalent among societies around the world. Whatever it is, they figured it lived in the woods in the back and it wasn't human. That's for sure. Because Joe, he didn't necessarily think it was demonic, but he wasn't really sure it wasn't either. I mean, he just knew that at the end of the day, this shit is like mad weird. So some nights Joe, he would take his late night run, which I'm like, Joe, night ain't for you. It's just not. And that's when he would see that blacker than black figure moving around. And it was in the same area of where they saw the man in the red shirt. So that was the investigative team's first visit. They were like, we kind of had some moments, but really not really. So they packed up and they left because motherfuckers got day jobs. And they decided that they were gonna, they'd come back at a later time. So, Rich thought that maybe since Joe was gone, the place was less active. So they leave Fox Hollow Farm. They return 18 months later. Because obviously in this in-between time, Joe moves out. 18 months later, they like, look, we need to come back, ask some more questions to get some more evidence because Fox Hollow Farm is a little spicy. So there is something dark and sinister in the house for sure. And this time he brought along Stephen, who was a friend and a Catholic priest, who was also a sensitive. He brought Stephen. He brought his opinion, from the religious side and from the spiritual side. But he was also of the opinion that the negative energy in the home wasn't Herb at all. I mean, he just said it wasn't entirely human, but for some reason it was drawn to the farm because of all the negative things that had taken place there. He also felt the entity loved to impersonate Herb. It's stupid. I call that the Rat King. Do you know what a Rat King is? It's terrible. You should Google it though. The reason why I'm calling it a Rat King is when he said that all the negative things that took place there kind of created this other entity. It reminded me of the Rat King because Rat Kings are what happen when rats' tails get tangled up to a point where they can't get off of each other. It just gets worse, bigger. Sometimes they eat each other and shit to get off of each other. You're probably like, Brittany, why do you even know what the fuck that means? I can't explain it. I did have a coworker by the name of Chelsea. She was the first person who told me what a fucking Rat King was, and I Googled it. I'm terrified of rats, by the way, but she told me what a Rat King was, and I was like, yo, that exists on Earth? God damn. Google a rat king. All right. So, but it made me think of that because if you got all these spirits together that somehow, all the negative energy together that create its own negative entity, I'm calling it the Rat King. But in this particular case, it's intelligent enough to impersonate Herb. So, quote, Herb does still drop in from time to time. This is what Steven said. He said, but he isn't a resident here, like some people seem to think he is. He's not around very much at all. And there are some others still earthbound. They may be some of his former victims, but I'm not 100% sure about that, end quote. Now, Rich also had with him 3 other investigators, and Jason being one from the first one. Rich decided to return to the farm, and it's likely because of the warmer months, because they did do this like plunge in the pool on the first visit. They didn't really find anything spectacular, but they did do I call it a polar plunge because they said it was cold as hell when they got in that pool. And it could be too that one of the reasons why it made more sense to come back to the warmer months is because they wanted to explore more of the woods, but also if they needed to get back in the pool, they wouldn't have to worry about the pool water being so cold. So interestingly though, they were able to talk on the phone with Tony Harris. Remember him? If you watched episode 1, you do. And I'm saying watched. I'm just going to always say watch because in my head, I'm a TV show host. I'm not. It's an episode that is a podcast and you listen, you don't watch. But Tony, let me give you a little backstory on Tony. In part 1, Tony is kind of the guy who helped nab Herb. He was the one that in a way sacrificed himself. Now, as I was getting into the paranormal stuff, his story was starting to get a little murky. Okay. Because I've seen a few things. I've seen he was a friend of someone. I've seen he was an informant. He may have been both. I've seen that, he was a lover of Herb. Then I just saw that he was an informant that was just like doing this for his friend. You know what I'm saying? And, in this particular book, they focus on the fact that he was his lover. I mean, he was the lover of Herb Baumeister. Tony is also incredibly psychically sensitive. In the first episode, I do mention, I was like, he was a good friend and he, that he has this intuition. He's, he knows that it's Herb and he follows him. He makes sure that he's like kicking it with Herb and all this other shit in order to get the information so he can nab the perpetrator. But it could possibly be that Tony was just really, really a sensitive. And what I mean by sensitive is that he's just flat out fucking psychic. Tony has an odd connection to this story. He has come back to the property post Herb. And he refers to the negative entity that is in the house as the frog. Because he said that whatever it was, it had an amphibian look, almost like a toad. Turns out, nobody else has that experience but Tony. But he felt that the frog was mostly in the swimming pool area. And he felt like it was able to move among the home and the grounds. So the goal of this, though, is like, okay, well then, maybe we should get some more evidence on the frog, and especially the non-human entity, the frog. So with this, Joe LeBlanc comes back, which I'm like, these people are so friendly. Y'all friendly. Because once I moved, I ain't no guarantee I'm coming back. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. He decided that he was going to come back. He was going to meet up with investigators. This is also one of those moments where I'm like, maybe, these people are truly having this experience. Because, motherfucker just hit me up on the line and be like, look, we're chilling over here at the Fox Hollow Farm. You want to have a conversation? Be like, hell no, I don't want to have a conversation. But then there are some people who are like, yeah, because this shit really fucking happened to me. And I want to talk about it. That's kind of the vibe I get from Joe LeBlanc. He came back to meet the investigators. He's no longer a resident, but the team is like optimistic, knowing that his presence seems to like get these spirits riled up pretty easily. So they're thinking, shit, we may actually get some shit from Joe. Joe seems to also be insensitive. So he's like standing there, he's looking at the door knocker of his old apartment. He said, quote, "This door knocker always used to knock itself at the same time, 1:45 in the morning. There were 7 knocks each time, always 7 knocks, no more, no less. And when Rob's son woke him up to tell him that somebody was knocking on the door to his bedrooms, that was also at 1:45, because now Rob's son is in that apartment now that Joe's moved out. So Rich felt like, quote, "It was more likely to be a residual phenomenon than an intelligent one, perhaps some kind of psychic leftover from the days in which the Baumeisters had lived at Fox Hollow. Joe had encountered somebody close to the family one day, we shall keep this man's identity anonymous, who had said that during his divorce, Herb had lived in the in-law apartment rather than the main house, and that sometimes when he came home late and found himself locked out, he could climb the wooden staircase, knock on the door in an attempt to get somebody to open it. It was an intriguing story, and if true, which can't prove or disprove, it would in some way explain the phantom noises that disturbed Joe and the Graves' son." So while Joe was with the paranormal investigators, the topic of Tony and his belief in an accomplice, had come up. Now Tony is the only. Well, he's not really the only person that believes there's an accomplice, but he definitely does. He believes that his name, he won't say his name. He said it's SLJ, which means sounds like Joe. Tony found him so evil that he refused to say his name at all. And at that time, Joe LeBlanc got a call from Tony Harris. So while they're investigating, Joe gets a call from Tony. Tony told him that SLJ was active at Fox Hollow Farm. This is a quote, that evening, and was prowling around the house because he was interested to see what they were up to. Huh? Wow. So in this investigation, they're like, okay, we're going to move room to room, all the rooms that we know for sure that, people have picked up shit in, and we're going to reinvestigate. So one room was Vicky's ensuite bathroom. There was an EVP session conducted there, and one of the investigators saw a white cat that was not present prior, and a cat not owned by the owner. So later in that evening, the investigator saw the cat again. It walked past her legs. It even walked past her legs to the point where she could feel it, and headed off into the woods and just disappeared. In another room, really active, was the locker room by the pool. One of the visiting tour guides, Lisa, she hated this room. One time she went past the room to go to the toilet, and that's when she felt a sudden burst of adrenaline, which we all know is the feeling one gets when their amygdala is triggered by fear and your fight or flight response goes fucking ham. So she said she could hear a literal voice in her head telling her to get the hell out of there. She felt like someone was in a room with her, so she refused to go into that room or near that room again. Smart. Quote, yet she still could not say why that was exactly, although she did have a theory that she believed was, in her own words, quote, kind of wacky. When I pressed her on the subject, Lisa said that she believed that somebody else was involved in the murders, somebody who was now dead and whose spirit was still earthbound at Fox Hollow Farm. Lisa's now number 2. Tony believes that there was an accomplice, and Lisa believes that. Now, it's believed that Herb Baumeister was not the only person involved in the murders, but there were probably two other people, SLJ and maybe Larry Eiler. SLJ, we do not know who the fuck that is, but Larry Eiler was a psycho highway killer. He murdered over 20 boys in the Midwest between 1982 and 1984. You know, I mean, I don't know. There seems to be a serial killer club. I don't know. Have you all ever watched Clown and the Candyman? That was when they kind of like started connect serial killers like John Wayne Gacy to other people and possibly like these whole rings, you know. And I was talking to Sal today about the shit because I'm like, yo, how the fuck do these people find each other? And it's likely because, you know, like attracts like. I don't know. Are you hanging out at a bar? You start talking about strangling and murdering boys. You get drunk. You snort some cocaine and you start fucking around having these conversations. I don't know. I don't know if it's the same conversation that one would have about Harry Potter books. You know, it's like, oh, I met this guy at the coffee shop and we started talking about Harry Potter. It's like, oh, I met this guy at the coffee shop and we started talking about murdering gay boys. And we were like, yo, I murder gay boys too. I do too. How the fuck does that happen? You know, like I'm not even like, I'm serious. Like, how does that happen? Like you meet a whole other dude that does the same weird shit that you do, who feels so, and I mean, who knows? I just know that like, this isn't the first time I've heard about this shit and I know that there are like, you know, you think of the Hillside Strangler, you find out that they're fucking related. It's like being related. That's a little different, you know. Richard Ramirez, he kind of learned how to kill from like his fucking uncle or cousin or some shit who was in war. Like you kind of understand that connection, but like, how you got a partner in this shit? How you know? It's like it's such a, you know, it's just such a fucked up topic. Like, when is this coming up? That's my question. Sorry, I'm drunk, but whatever. When the fuck does this come up? So, Herb, if he still haunts the house, his apparition is typically not evil. Lisa says she saw him. Lisa says she saw him standing in the window once, Herb, which is likely just residual energy, that's when the evil leaves. The energy leaves almost like a recording in a particular space, and then it's just played on a loop. That's what she probably saw. It's also likely, on a religious front, that Herb is kind of like stalling his attempt to avoid whatever is coming after death. You know, if you believe in that sort of thing. Now, there are portals that are mentioned multiple times throughout the book. There are other locations in the woods as well, especially the areas around the burn piles. Herb's bathroom was also a problem for women. Women typically feel unwelcome there since he didn't like his wife to see him naked and would only get undressed in his own bathroom. His bathroom is believed to be a portal, which is a, quote, gateway that is said to allow spirit beings two-way access to their own realm of existence and our own material world. So let's talk about Brian Sanders, though. You're like, who is that? Brian Sanders was brought in by Robert Graves, the owner of the property. He was a psychic medium. Brian, he seemed pretty legit. I didn't look him up, but I don't know if he's black because it kind of comes up, but I think he may be black or other. Brian approached Rob years prior to introduce himself and told Rob that the spirit had led him to his home. Rob felt that Brian was different. Brian believed that the spirits were growing tired of all of these motherfuckers visiting the house. They did not want to be treated like a sideshow attraction. And if they were going to receive visitors, if they were going to accept visitors, they could at least help them move on. Which is a valid motherfucking request to me. That's an intelligent entity. When you got people traipsing through your shit, taking pictures of your shit, and like, oh, I saw this kid running. It's like, yeah, could you help me move on then? Like, so Brian was the first to be like, yo, the spirits are kind of irritated with this whole situation. They're not circus freaks. They want to rest. So Brian kind of proved his skill by mentioning to Rob, a woman named Helen, who was Vicky's mother's best friend. And he also mentioned Aunt Jean, who was Vicky's aunt. And Brian started picking up on the Native American spirits as well. He also picked up on the victims. So Rob kind of believes that Brian Sanders was the best psychic to ever come to Fox Hollow. And so Brian checks with Rich to make sure his intentions are good. He's like, Rich, the author of the book and the investigator, he checks to see if his intentions are good. He's like, yo, I'll join the team, but I just want to make sure we on the level. So when he entered the area they used as a base camp, the bar area, Brian was confused as to how they could work in like so much residual energy. He goes, well, how are y'all working down? To him, the area was literally like Grand Central Station. It is also Brian who believes that there was a portal in the swimming pool and the closet, by the way. Brian believes that there was something that was there pretending to be Herb. He said that Herb is not here, but there is something here that pretends to be him. This is an entity that was created from all of the negative energy at Fox Hollow, and that's what you have to watch out for, Richard. It has some aspects of Herb's personality, but it's actually not him. His actions fed it, made it grow. Rat King. Told you. So Brian was sure that the entity could be pretending to be Herb and speaking the way he did to trick them for its own amusement. And people may have been thinking they were talking to Herb, but they were actually talking to the Rat King. So Brian told them, quote, "We need to be aware that this entity could very well assume the guise of Herb Baumeister, speaking in the same way that he did, with a view to tricking or misleading us for its own amusement. Many of those who had come to Fox Hollow in the past and assumed that they had made contact with the spirit of the I-70 strangler were really communicating with it instead." Brian believed that Herb was not able to be reached. He was in a specific place, like purgatory, and did not have the ability to communicate. He also believes that Herb couldn't truly help himself when committing the acts. He was very sick, really sick. So Brian said that one room he would not go into was the pool area. The swimming pool was a portal. The amount of negative energy caused it to form. Brian said that the pool looks like, quote, a purple and greenish energy portal right there under the water with human hands rising up from it. I could hear the voices talking. Because the Native American spirits were already on the land, the evil deeds that Baumeister engaged in caused the energy to grow. He believed that the reason why Vicky didn't like that bathroom was because of the, quote, young guy. Brian believes the young guy was in a state of confusion, not knowing he was dead, and Vicky picks up on his energy. And according to Brian, the, quote, extremely psychic Joe had actually gotten himself snared up in the spirit portal, which acted like a kind of vortex or whirlpool. Sorry, my words. He said whirlpool, dragging him under the water. The hands that he felt clutching at his neck were those which were blindly groping free of the portal, Brian explained, and were not meant to be an assault on him at all. So, if you remember that instance when Joe had his experience in the pool with the kids, Brian is saying that was just the hands grabbing him accidentally. It's like, we weren't trying to bring you with us. We scraping. We groping. We trying to get out of this. We trying to get free. So when the investigators left, Vicky had called, like for the night, Vicky had called Rich and asked if they were still downstairs, and they weren't. So she had heard the downstairs patio door open. Nothing was stolen. No equipment was touched. And Rob had found the door was open. So they checked to see if the mic picked up any sound. There was sound. They could hear rattling metal. They didn't know what it was, though. So they tested all the doors. And there were two possible options: the door at the top of the stairs or the door of the wine cabinet. Both were locked. But Vicky was sure she had heard the patio door. But the noise sounded different on the recording. So Brian had told them that spirits would start to make their presence known during the investigation. And this may have been one of those moments. Now, Tony. I want to talk about Tony. Tony was actually the lover of Herb, right? Even knowing, possibly, that he was a killer. He has this weird, playful tone when he talks about quote unquote Brian, because he refers to him as Brian. He doesn't refer to him as Herb because he doesn't know him as Herb. He knows him as Brian. He says this weird shit, quote, "Rob's like to call this the bar now, but back in the day, Herb called this the kitchenette." Huh? He said, I can still see him standing there mixing drinks and things like that. It looks quite different now. For starters, it's missing a lot of mannequins. Jokes. I get it. Gallows humor. Jokes, though. Sir, you were in love with a murderer. When talking about Herb, Tony said that Herb was two different people. Killer, of course, but the other one was kind, and he called him Brian. And when shown the weird Herb Baumeister video, sorry y'all, when shown the weird Baumeister video, which I'm going to put that in the end, actually. I'm going to put a little clip in there for you so you can hear it. When shown the weird Baumeister video, which there's a Baumeister video. I'm going to explain it to you real quick. So you can Google it. I'm actually going to link it. Herb Baumeister had been caught up on news camera being interviewed because apparently there was roadkill on the road next to Fox Hollow Farms, and the street painters, the people that paint the lane lines, they painted over the roadkill. They didn't even kick it out of the way. They didn't move it. That's an opportunity to see Herb Baumeister in action. So if you were curious, there's an opportunity to see him speak. What I also noticed, and hey, I don't know, maybe it's because I know he was into it, his neck is mad crepey. He has eczema. He had eczema, real bad eczema on his neck. And I wonder if it had anything to do with the asphyxiation. Probably. Sip. So they showed Tony, that weird ass Herb Baumeister. Whatever. Weird Herb. Brittany, relax. You know you gotta pee. Just relax. They showed Tony the Herb Baumeister video. He said, quote, he's trying to cause trouble for somebody. Matter of fact, I'm gonna play it right now.
The Indiana Department of Transportation maintains over 11,000 miles of roadway, and we paint those miles of roadway each year, and this is just an isolated incident that happened.
The drive-by striping, or whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with the spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot of the thing.
A raccoon, which met its demise on the yellow line, became one with the paint. The raccoon has since been removed. This is all that's left.
This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. I mean, the poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
So just what is the explanation for this?
So he says, He's trying to cause trouble for somebody like that painter to get him fired. That was Tony's verdict. Quote, he knew the game was up at that point. He was fully aware that he didn't have much longer left. He was tired of life, and his only real concern was his children. You see, Herb was demonically possessed. And that is what drove him to do the terrible things that he did. It took control of him. That's one of the things he separated from, that separated him from the Herb aspect of his personality. It's Tony's belief that Herb Baumeister was demon possessed. Herb was not an overly aggressive person, and he never wanted confrontation, which I find hard to believe. And when he met Brian, he intentionally tried to physically dominate him to get him to understand that he could be overtaken if need be, because Tony was 6'5". Tony's a big dude. So then Tony tells this very interesting story of one of his trips to Fox Hollow Farm. He arrives and Herb parks the car like on this weird wedge, is like into a divot. The car angles up and the headlights illuminate the apartment window above the garage as if he was trying to signal to someone in the apartment. So Tony believes that someone was waiting in that apartment, possibly an accomplice. When Herb figured out no one was there, Herb freaked out and started slamming his hands on the steering wheel, screaming, "You can't depend on anyone anymore." Yo, that's fucking weird. Could you imagine pulling up? You're like, I just got on Hinge, y'all, that dating app. Could you imagine having a date? And you're like, you pull up to homie's like situation, even though I wouldn't get in anybody else's car. Like, I'm taking my car. I ain't going. That's just it. My car is probably better anyway. Could you imagine pulling up to somebody's shit and they do that? You're like, first of all, why you just beating the steering wheel mad like this? You can't depend on anybody anymore. What the fuck are you talking about? Tony said that he came close multiple times to killing him. They did some coke. Herb almost shot him. What? This isn't even a party no more. You almost shot me. Now, Tony did claim to have seen shadow figures that warned him to stay away from like the changing room one time that they were at, like Herb's Herb's house. That the area was like attempting, like Herb kept trying to like lure him into this particular area, and Tony said that he kept seeing shadow figures at that time, warning him to stay away from the changing area. But my thing was, it's like, why keep going back then? What? I just don't know what Tony's situation is. Like, what's your situation? Like, you fell in love with this dude who's clearly like, oh, you fell in love with this dude's personality, like this one of his personalities, but you know it's one of his personality. I guess we all do that. Never mind. Never mind. I'ma shut up. If you know, you know. Now, but still, why keep coming back? It's like, were you the friend of the victim or not? So that night, and in part one, I mentioned that Herb fell asleep. He got high, fell asleep. In this book, I don't know if this is two separate incidences or if it's the same instance, but there was a night where Tony drugged Herb until he passed out. But it wasn't even like drug Herb like Bill Cosby drug Herb. He had basically given him like some really strong ass weed that after they had done a bunch of coke. And I'm assuming they had fucked and strangled each other and done a bunch of coke. You know, that would make a person sleepy. I don't mean to laugh. This is a nervous chuckle because I gotta pee. But also, I'm assuming you do a little coke, you do a little blow, you get choked, you have some sex, you probably gonna fall asleep. I'm assuming. Never happened to me, but I'm assuming. So he saw a shadow figure, you know. He kept seeing these like shadow figures that were like kind of leading him into the right path instead of like putting him in a position to putting him into positions of danger. And this changing room was a big one. So he drugged him until he passed out. So he searched the house He blatantly said for items to steal. Like, he had a different life back then. He was looking for shit to steal. And that's when he saw a shadow figure that was like leading him away from the changing room. So, you know, Tony had just decided at that point, like, I can't fuck with that room. And one of the investigators had even had an experience where they could hear an entire conversation from outside of the door while they were on the toilet. Cause I'm assuming the changing room had a bathroom. I mean, I'm assuming it's a bathroom. But there was no one there. And when Tony finally got into the changing room, he witnessed that the locks on the lockers would like just started moving up and down, up and down. And then he hears this like loud, like boom, boom, and just screams and just like, what the fuck? He thought it was a prank. And he said whenever he wanted to talk to Herb's spirit, he'd just go back to that room, which I'm kind of weirded out by how much he's in love with Herb, but you know, to each his own. Part of me is just kind of like the fact that he felt so comfortable having these kind of conversations with you. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot that you know. So anyway, the staircase was also apparently haunted. Tony claimed to see shadow people lining the staircases. He said that the hands would come out and they would try to grab them. That's a bit much, but whatever. The shadow people thing is kind of weird. So meanwhile, Tony's like reminiscing on things that him and Herb used to do and like things that Herb would use to choke him one time. And he says, quote, stopping outside of the pump room, he indicated the length of the hose that was hanging on the wall, the same one that had been used to take so many innocent lives. Herb didn't restrict himself to the hose, however. This is what Tony said. He also liked to use a knotted silk tie, which is extremely difficult to get out of once it's tightened around the neck. And quote, he liked to use leather belts too. Tony revealed. I can still hear the raspy whispering voice as he had his hands locked around my throat. So finally, Rich calls out Tony. He's like, quote, after he failed to kill me on the first night, I felt as though he was grooming me. Tony explained, I think he wanted to get rid of sounds like Joe and put me in his place instead. It would be an apprenticeship, if you like. It was strange, but even when he was holding me down and was choking me, I never once felt afraid. His voice would become ecstatic. Now, Tony began to mimic him. Oh, your eyes are bulging. Your tongue is beginning to stick out. Tony believed it was all a game and was like heavy into role playing. After a period of floating face down in the water, simulating death, Herb would come flying up out of the water, feigning outrage. Oh, don't you know that's how accidents happen? The killer would say. You could have killed me. You should be more careful. It was just a game to him. This is what Tony is saying. Tony then proceeds to tell them that Herb was never physically abusive towards him. He was just, he had just told the FBI that to get them to investigate the missing boys. And then he looks up in the air as if he's talking to Herb in heaven or some shit. And he goes, quote, now, my love, if you're listening to me, you know why I said those things. I had to stop it. The deaths had to end. I don't trust Tony. They don't smell right. It don't smell right. I don't like it. Sorry, I had to get some water. I don't like it. Now, Tony had started to also speak to another spirit by the name of Albert. Tony said that he was lesser known victim. He had paid for sex, and when Herb tried to strangle him, Albert attacked him, but then Herb grabbed his gun and shot him in the stomach. He ran away to the pump room. He bled out, and Tony is the only person to ever mention Albert. So there's that. Now, Tony's advice was to keep positivity up, to draw lighter spirits towards them. And if they focus on negative energy, they draw out the things that was pretending to be Herb. So it's clear that Herb was two people in many ways. I mean, according to Tony, Herb would go between Brian and Herb like a switch went off. Tony also mentions that SLJ was the one that caused Brian to kill himself. He was also evil incarnate. Tony claims that Brian was always afraid of him. His theory is that SLJ is a real person. His accomplice is now dead. Like, Tony feared saying his name because he was afraid he'd summon him. Tony believes this shit. Like, Tony believes this shit. That's the thing. Like, whether I believe it or not, it seems as though Tony kind of believes it. He does believe, too, that several women were murdered. Now, Rich S. Step says this is the first time that there ever been any mention of women. I mean, now, mind you, women were murdered because women were murdered. Remember in the first episode, whatever, you'll find that out if you listen to it. But at Fox Hollow, we don't know of women being murdered at Fox Hollow. But they're not bound to the home. They are able to come in and out and to visit. I don't know what that means. He believes there is one demonic entity there, and that's the frog. And he believes it predated the Baumeister. So it's a trickster and it may have just used Herb. I don't know if he's in this weird way trying to clear Herb because he liked him. He really cared for him. You know what I mean? And I don't know if he's just like, Herb wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a bad guy. He was just possessed. I feel like in a lot of ways, he's kind of just making excuses for him. So when Rich asks Tony if he thinks Herb feels sorry for what he did, Tony says he does. And he felt remorseful even when he was alive. The man was so tormented by what he was doing, the things he could not stop doing. He wanted so badly to get out from under all of Sorry, I had to belch. He wanted so badly to get out from under all of that while he was alive to spend his life with his children. He couldn't stop himself. Tony, how you know? How you know? And right before he leaves, Tony feels the need to address the fact that he's not a killer like people think he is. Rich then asks Tony if he misses the days with Herb. Tony didn't miss them, but he did enjoy being back at the farm. The truth is, without Tony, we would not have had this. Like, we wouldn't really know we would know who Herb Baumeister was eventually, because eventually he would have got caught. But Tony did do a lot of work to make sure that Herb Baumeister didn't kill again, in a way. He truly believes his stories. I mean, but there's no way to confirm or deny any of them. So his other belief is that now that the place is just angelic. You know, they have so many visitors that come to pray and, kind of help the spirits move along. The house is still haunted, but it's not as active and is growing more and more dormant. So the Fox Hollow Farms is definitely, they still get some activity here and there, but it's not as crazy as it was before. I don't know why. I'm not an investigator. I'm just a drunk person that read a couple books and watched a couple of documentaries. That's all I know. With that being said, that is the hauntings of Fox Hollow Farm. Now, I don't have a lot to follow that up with. I think that the Tony situation is weird. I think that the Tony situation is probably the weirdest part about all of this. Because you're probably like, Brittany, there's ghosts, there's demons, there's portals. Sure. But, the Tony thing is strange because I think Rich asked an appropriate question. Why are you so comfortable with all this shit? Why did this not bother you in real time? I'm not going to blame anything on Tony. Of course not. I know Tony believes that he was groomed in a way. He was trying to groom him, or that he had like a really solid relationship with Tony. I mean, with Herb, but Herb was mentally fucking ill. He was mentally ill. If you want to call that demon possessed, sure. But we know that he was mentally ill. So how y'all feeling? I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is my first one that has been based on a haunting, and I hope I gave you all the information you need, and I hope this makes sense when I listen to it right now, because I definitely gotta pee. So this is I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God. I hope you enjoyed your Cosmopolitan. I hope you enjoyed the hauntings of Fox Hollow Farm, and I want to just make sure that you understand that we are here for not just the assholes who did this terrible shit to these people, but also for the victims. And I really hope that with all of the new DNA technology and the genealogical databases, that they're able to really, really nail down who all Herb the Psycho Baumeister killed. All right. Now, let's talk about this. I need more time to research. I'm gonna be 100% honest with y'all. I'm a one woman motherfucking show over here. So, I think after December, I'm gonna go from every week to every other week because, work-life balance. I'm still working through some things personally, and then I'm like working actively, to be able to afford to do this. And I need time to research because, it takes a minute. I want to, not even that I want to be thorough because I don't really care about that. This is more an opinion-based podcast than a one that's, let me give you all the facts so we can research it and discover shit. No, I don't know. I'm not a cop. Look, okay. But I do want to say thank you for those who have listened up until this point. So I'm thinking that after December, I'm going to go to every other week just so I can kind of like give myself time to prepare the episode, prepare the social media shit. I'm not trying to be famous off this shit, so I don't really care. It's a hobby, but I don't want it to start feeling like a job. I don't want it to start feeling like a burden. So I have to create some boundaries somewhere, especially until I get like, if I get to a point where I actually need like help. But since I'm doing it by myself, I got to pace myself. So I got a case that I'm working on that I'm going to definitely present to you next week. And then I'll probably keep presenting cases up until about Christmas. And then I'll do one for the new year, so that the 29th-ish, I'll do one on the 29th. So the 29th will be my last like weekly one. And then come January, I'll start doing it every other week. So I'll do the January 12th, the January 26th, that type of shit. I can't do every week. I'm sorry. And two, I'm not going to lie. I got to make sure I'm maintaining this girlish figure, and I can't drink as much as I used to. I'm getting old. So, but I appreciate you all so much, and thank you so much for anybody who's listening to this. I look at this stuff all the time anyway, and I'm happy that I have other people to share some of this information with. So this has been I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God, and I will talk to y'all next week. All right. Bye. Peace.